the tricky thing is that we get so set into these rigid ideas that have actually been socially conditioned. So it's not an all or nothing. It's or an either or. It's a both and.
What's shaking? Welcome back to All In, and we're going to dive right in today. Before we do, I want to ask you to share this with at least 3 people because we don't take sponsors, and the only way we impact more people, help more people, is because of you. So please help us out today, and you're going to want to because Jemma Rane is back for a second episode. We got into a lot of conversations around relationships and how to even maybe separate when the person is a good person. How do you know what time it is? But then also we were talking a little bit about toxic masculinity, which I think is where we're going to start today. Jemma, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Rick. I'm happy to be here.
I love this because as we start to figure out where we're going to go with today's episode, you were talking about toxic masculinity, and I was saying the inverse is positive masculinity. Mm-hmm. And this is I know you have questions for me on this, and if I may start around this, is I feel that
Absolutely.
Toxic masculinity is a phrase that's used a lot when women don't feel like their man is really being a man. And I can see it as almost like a conundrum, right? Almost like it's a paradox, I think, for men, because they want to step up and they want to be a man, but then there's this inverse side of, oh, but you got to be sensitive, and I need you to hear me, and which are all very, very true, But then it becomes, well, which one? And it's like we feel like sometimes we have to bounce back and forth between these two personas. In order to not be taken the wrong way and actually step up and quote unquote be the man in a relationship. It's an interesting paradox from my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love even listening to you describe that. You actually helped identify the problem, that it feels like there's only 2 options and that they're compartmentalized. So already straight out of the gate, there's a lack of integration for men about what it means to be a man. And so I think toxic is a word that's overused anyway. I mean, I use it myself, but I think as soon as you put toxic in front of it, if I put myself in a guy's shoes, I'm already feeling a little defensive. I already feel that you're criticizing being a man, right? So I prefer to use bell hooks term, which is patriarchal masculinity, right? Because what's happened is from the time, men are little boys, they are actually conditioned to not have choice, right? They're conditioned to behave in a certain way that patriarchal masculinity says this is what it means to be a man. And as I think we touched on before, it's about a mindset of competition, of win or lose, only those 2 options, of power over in order to feel empowered. That's false empowerment, right? So if we shift it to patriarchal masculinity and understand that that's what's damaging for both men and women, the difference is for man, it compromises his authentic sense of self. And for a woman, it can actually lead to a life-threatening situation.
Yeah, no doubts. There's an interesting book that I read since the last time you were on. And it's called Understanding Women. And I'd have to find, I do Audible all the time. I'd have to find, I think it's by Beth. I'm going to find it here. Oh, geez. See, I got the new iPhone 13, and I haven't signed back into Audible yet because I just activated this thing, and this is why it's going to take. Now I get all the messages, hey, I got it, right? This is hilarious. Anyways, back to what we were talking about. Anyways, the book is called Understanding Women. It was actually Alison Armstrong. There we go. I don't know if you've listened to it.
I haven't read that. Yeah, I know it, but I haven't read it.
There's a book, the audio version I really like because I listen to most from an audio perspective, but this one was actually a live recording from an event that she was hosting. So you actually get to hear her inflections and vocal tones and just some of the humor behind some of this stuff too. And
the energy.
Yeah, right? Oh my gosh, yes. And some of what she was talking about was about about men, and this is from a positive masculinity perspective, was that men's innate instinct is to be the provider and protector. Like hands down. She's like, that's what they like years worth. I'm talking like millennia worth of instinct that's built into them. And when they come, because this comes back to women need to feel like they're heard, right, by men. And men will struggle with this sometimes, but then it becomes, if they don't do this, it becomes toxic masculinity like we're talking about. But they're already thinking, her example was using a pool. She wanted a pool in her backyard, and the pool was going to cost, I don't know, $30,000, something like that, in-ground pool. And he just like hands down vetoed it without anything else. And she felt shut down in that moment. Whereas his mind went to, after they finally cleared the air, had the conversation to, 30 years down the road, that pool is not $30,000 because we'd have to pull the $30K out of our retirement fund, and that $30K really is going to be $250,000, decades from now. So he was from that provider and protector mentality, saying like, I'm setting us up for a secure financial future. And it was interesting to hear the two perspectives on that, because it was her own experience with her husband, who she loves very, very much. But it could have been to where she felt shut down, vetoed. She did feel that, because that was his area of responsibility, but she didn't feel like he heard her out on any of this. But then she didn't recognize that, he actually is doing exactly what I asked him to do in our relationship, and that's the role that he's taken on. It was interesting. That could have gone very, very badly.
Yeah. It's a common pattern, right, that you just described from her perspective, and you can see where the disconnection comes in. And I would also add in that in terms of this idea of being men understanding that their worth is about being a good provider, that's innate, I'm not so sold on that. I'm not completely dismissing it. It's just when you go back to hunter and gatherer days, sometimes the men weren't successful in their hunting expeditions, and all the food was provided from what the women were gathering. So they were also providers. Right. So I think the tricky thing is that we get so set into these rigid ideas that have actually been socially conditioned. So it's not an all or nothing. It's or an either or. It's a both and.
Oh yeah.
Right. So it's to me, it's about for people expanding their sense of their worth, so that men understand your worth is actually about your being, and your worth is about being a provider. You don't have to choose, right? Because then their worth becomes really contingent upon success in their careers. That's so limiting. Right?
That's what a lot of men dive into and sort of attribute to their value, is what am I bringing to the table from a stability perspective, to financial shelter, all of that, but I'm hearing what you're saying on that as well. This was just their scenario, and I feel that it would. I'm with you that it would vary from relationship to relationship. Yeah. I think I brought up my brother last episode too, right? Because it's his scenarios where his wife makes more than him. She's a CPA, he's a technical support manager for cars.com, and their relationship works very, very well that way. So they're both contributing, and from a financial perspective, she is more so than he, and they're perfectly good with it, which is awesome. But they've also had a lot of communication around these roles too, versus you went back to you started with this word, versus a competition. Yeah.
I think that plays into relationships a lot. I think society in general conditions us with a mindset of competition, and men more so than women. Women are encouraged and supported through many opportunities of learning collaborative thinking, a collaborative mindset, and men are actually discouraged from that. So I'm not saying that competition can't be fun. Right? I mean,
well, of course,
there's value in that. Yes. Right. There's value in that.
It can even be foreplay.
Right. It's just that when it becomes really a rigid and a dominant mindset, that's when it's problematic in a relationship, and also just for men moving through life in general, right? Because it's a focus on external validation of your worth. Yeah. Whether you're winning or losing, right? So that's a problem.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you right, are you saying that it's an external validation of your worth that really absolutely has nothing to do with your relationship itself?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's important. We all, for all of us, we do care what people think of us, right? That is part of how we learn to see ourselves, is by the feedback and the input we get from other people. And yet we also want to be able to cultivate our sense of worth on our own, from our own understanding of ourselves, what we value about ourselves.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you think that this, if you want to call this toxic, we could call it toxic competition in relationships?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's probably pretty accurate, at least from our discussion today. How does that play into, or is that really the cause to anybody in a relationship saying, well, I need to make sure that I'm financially independent on my own? Is that a red flag in and of itself if you see these things popping up and that's the way that you're thinking?
No, I don't think so. And I was going to ask you about that too, right? Because in terms of what we're talking about with this identification for men, and part of their identity being that to be good men, they have to be good providers. What does that mean for a man then in society now as women become better and better at being financially independent? Right? Isn't there then a threat to that if that is how a man's
that's
worth?
What they're stuck on, yeah.
Yeah, right?
For sure.
So for women, when they were, years ago, decades ago, when they really didn't have as many options to be financially independent, right? When that was blocked, they didn't have that much choice in their relationships, whether they stayed or left, right? So it's really a factor now, their financial independence.
This is not a loaded question. The financial independence side of it, I wanted to preface it with that. How do you bring that into a relationship without fostering toxic competition?
Okay, well, you tell me more about what you're thinking in terms of how it creates, toxic competition.
Look at you. I love the conversation. No, what I'm getting at is if you see yourself, because competition is something that I've never wanted to see in any kind of relationship.
Okay.
And it's if you have the conversation ahead of time, and even when I was doing some pastoring, I would have these types of conversations in sort of like the premarital counseling, right? Or just it's more coaching is what I was doing to say, hey, here are some things, and I would never dictate what they should decide because that's not my place, right? And even in what you do as a coach, you want to lead people to their own decisions on things. So I would spark the conversation and say, here's some things that you should talk about. What happens when you guys start? Now we'll take like the quintessential textbook, which doesn't happen too much anymore. Two single people coming together, going to have kids someday, don't have kids right now. So it would, just for this example, talk about what happens when you have kids. Is somebody going to quit their job at that point? And who would be the primary breadwinner, so to speak, for the family? Would the woman go back to work, in a heterosexual marriage? How would this work for you? Have these conversations now ahead of time. You've got some time, but maybe this is something to bring up even before you say, I do. That way there's no misconceptions 3 years, 5 years down the road, whatever, when this comes up in the form of a toxic competition and you guys find out that you're not on the same page.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And so in that, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming that you're thinking as well that, let's say a woman became more financially successful than her partner in a heterosexual relationship, then he could feel somewhat threatened.
Yeah, without this type of conversation, you got it.
Yeah, rather than, if his worth isn't contingent upon his financial success, then it's not a threat. Then it's great. We can enjoy a different lifestyle if there's more money, right? And I couldn't agree with you more in terms of talking about all of those. I remember with my ex-husband before we had kids, we talked a lot about what's the parenting going to look like. Yeah. And both of us really wanted it to be 50-50. And you're right, people don't talk about those details a lot. They also don't talk about what love is.
Ooh, truth.
Right?
Yeah.
So I really think that what I observe in some relationships is that it's really about care more, and there isn't love being cultivated. Right? It's about, there are a number of elements to love, and care is one of them. However, what some people are feeling in their relationship is it doesn't feel like love. And that they don't want to say that. They think that just would be the most, hideous thing to say, until maybe if they do decide to leave the relationship, right? So going into a relationship, people also don't talk about how do you nurture and cultivate love?
Yeah.
What is that?
What are rhythms for connection that we're going to have? Because it's
absolutely.
Care is the thing that I'm hearing you, and care is the thing that sort of bubbles to the surface and becomes sort of the primary, I would think. But then that could lead to not so great of a codependent relationship, which could also, if there's no love there years down the road and all you have is the care, that's great. You could have a good friend, a best friend that could care for you.
Absolutely.
Versus a partner. It's a different scenario. And I wish that that becomes probably the seed of a lot of discontent too in relationships, because they recognize that there's nothing more than that. But on the horrible inverse side of that too is it's probably one of the things, because that care does exist, that will keep people in an unhappy relationship because of fear of losing that care.
Yes, I agree with you. Fear of losing it, fear of what it means to be alone, the society's conceptions about being alone, that you're not whole unless you're with somebody, right? People not knowing how to love themselves. Like, there's all this talk about self-love right now. And I find people don't know what that is. When you ask them about it, they'll start describing practices of care, right?
Huh.
Which isn't love. It's a dimension of love. It's an element of love, but it's not actually going to feel that fulfilling, right? And the same thing in a relationship. And you're right, in terms of that codependent part, if people are really interacting with their partner to try to get, needs met that they're not even really aware of, and not aware of the adaptive strategies they've developed since their childhood to try and kind of almost unconsciously manipulate situations. People get really, triggered by the word manipulate. But
it's truth, though. It's the right word.
Right? I mean, we all kind of do it sometimes unconsciously, right? So I think that's a big part of it, is understanding what love feels like, that love is going to ebb and flow, that it happens in, Barbara Fredrickson, who wrote Love 2.0, talks about micro moments of love and expanding our understanding of love, right? That it's not just in, romantic relationships or friendships, relationships with kids, that we can actually have these micro moments of all these positive emotions being evoked with like a small exchange with a stranger even.
Yeah.
Right. But couples get stuck in this place of complacency. Right. And they're not consciously cultivating those moments. In the same way, they're not usually consciously cultivating desire.
Ooh, yeah.
That's a big one too.
That's something that has to be stoked.
Right, but think of, right, you understand that, but there's a lot of people, and men who don't, right? And so they're actually yearning for intimacy just as much as women. And yet in many heterosexual relationships, they get stuck in their rigid ways of trying to get intimacy, right? Men through sex, women through talking.
Yeah.
Through emotional connection. And that actually distances them even more. Goodness. Right? And what you find a lot, like there's a reason that, one of my videos about desire went viral, is because women were saying, yes, guys don't understand this in terms of cultivating desire and arousal over time. Right? That's how a lot of women are aroused over time. It's not immediate arousal. And so focus on the seduction and the desire process, right? Rather than, how many times a week or a month, people are having sex.
So you're saying, as a man, you should leave women hanging every now and then, just to be like,
yes, yes,
there's
absolutely,
a tactic. Yep.
right, and learn some skills of seduction and cultivating desire, of letting the imagination,
Yeah, The Art of Seduction, also another very good book.
Yes.
I don't know if you've read that or not, but it's phenomenal. Interesting turn of conversation. Yes. These are all so true. And it's, we're talking a lot. I mean, we're almost painting like a doom and gloom picture here. A lot of this stuff that we're talking about sadly bubbled to the surface when people are stuck in their homes for so long with each other this past year. And they realize, as you were talking, especially about care and the word complacency, it's like that's where some probably got stuck, is in the complacency of care. And that's all they saw in front of them. And then it became obligatory. Right?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought up that word.
Not a desire to care for that person anymore, but you feel obligated to do so rather than something you can or even more so want to do.
Yes, I think obligatory is such a big word in terms of relational dynamics, right? And going back to not just care, but again, love. When love feels like a choice, it's incredibly powerful. When it feels obligatory, and unfortunately that happens in long-term relationships and marriages as well, right? When you really care about someone's well-being, when you care about their fulfillment, and you're not feeling this reciprocity of love, you're not feeling like true love helps people feel their spirit feels alive, right? They feel like they're growing. They feel connected to their true self. They feel more open-minded and innovative and creative. And, people talk about, that's why in the initial stage, when people fall in love, in terms of, the chemical reward, right? Those first 18 to 24 months.
High, you got
yeah, exactly. And the serotonin low, and they'll talk about feeling alive.
And the oxytocin bonding, everything,
Right. So what happens after that stage in terms of, again, cultivating, small moments of that, right? And so in a long-term relationship, people often do feel this sense of obligation to their partner, right? So then it doesn't feel like a love of choice. And yet that makes them feel so incredibly guilty. So then they shut that down. They suppress that awareness instead of, like you said, we're maybe painting a doom and gloom, but we have to identify the problems accurately, right?
Exactly. Then you're stuck in an obligated relationship, or at least you're not stuck, because stuck is a choice. From my perspective, if somebody feels stuck or whatever, like, cool, then you can change what you're doing right now. Because what's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Right.
That's right. If you feel obligated to do so, cool, change it. And it's tough, but especially when you have a misconception around what love is. And you go back to the care, but then it's like, okay, well, there's a lot of effort that will need to be done. Hey, there's a lot of effort both ways. There's a lot of effort to stay stuck, no joke, and there's a lot of effort to build a good, healthy relationship. Both of them take work. So which one? Are you going to stay in this middle area to where you're just lazy and you're just ignoring reality of what's going on right now? Or which side are you going to put work into? Because it takes effort to stay stuck, and it takes effort to have a healthy relationship, or it takes effort to get out of a toxic relationship. Everything takes work.
You're right. Absolutely. And the more, and in terms of people feeling stuck, they often, because of that emotional state that they're in, it actually kind of hinders curiosity. Right. And we need to tap back into curiosity and to ask ourselves the right questions in terms of understanding, why do I feel stuck? What can I do to start tapping into my worth again, and what my desires and my dream for a better future, and what does that mean, and how do I, in terms of the work put into a relationship, I like to think of it in terms of investment in the growth of the relationship.
Amen. Yep.
Right. I think that sounds a little more motivating than work, because no one's asking for more work. Right.
Nobody likes work.
No. Do you know what I mean? So if you think about it in terms of nourishing a relationship, nourishing the connection. And along with that, that also means nourishing yourself.
Yeah.
Not just putting it all on the relationship in terms of your fulfillment.
What are you doing? What are you bringing? What can you change? And looking inward first and saying, okay, there's this scenario. How can I change the way that I'm being perceived? Or how can I can't control the other person's feelings. That's impossible. But how can I change the way? Because there's a different way when you look at it, like, okay, this individual, my partner, my boyfriend, girlfriend, my whatever, my friend even, if there's a way that their brain can only hear some things. And I know this from being a communicator. It's like you identify your audience, and I'm dumbing it down real hardcore here, right? When you identify who you're actually speaking to, and when you get to know that person, you can change your form of communication so that they are able to hear you better.
Absolutely. I agree with you so much. I mean, and this has been an interesting process because the men who don't feel threatened by what I'm saying, who understand, I am not blaming men, for the dynamics in this relationship. Yeah, some men do. I mean, some men really do. They're coming after me. I want both men and women to understand.
Send them my way if they're coming after you.
Okay, good. Okay, good. that patriarchal masculinity is very damaging to men too, right? Because it's teaching you from a young age to disconnect from yourself. If you're discouraged from identifying and moving through a full range of emotions, think about how that's then also in terms of love, how that's going to affect your ability to receive and to give love. You have been taught to move through life with shifting all of your unpleasant emotions to frustration and anger.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I've been thinking the same thing the past couple of days. So keep going and I'll give you my take too.
I do want your take, especially as a man.
Like self-awareness is a big thing of mine. And I try to do this. So some work I've been doing on myself the past several months was around this, because frustration and anger are very basic emotions. And, they're very basic negative emotions. They're called negative, but it just means they're on that side of the spectrum.
Unpleasant.
Yeah, there you go. That's a better word.
Yeah.
With those two, when I have felt those the past several months, it's like, instead of continuing that way or even apologizing for being angry or frustrated in the moment, I would take a moment, and I'm still doing this, to just sit. And this has to do everything. Like, I've even been logging my emotions now in different emotional waves. You're clapping. That's great. Yeah. and then I'll wait there even just for a minute. But then it's the question's like, okay, I'm feeling this. I'm going to sit here a minute and allow myself to feel this, because I feel like this foundational emotion, of frustration and anger is really there, and it's masking what I'm actually feeling, or the why I'm feeling the way around this situation, this person, whatever. And then I'll just sit there and let myself sit in that for a moment. And then I'll end up coming up with the why. And then it's like an illumination for me, saying like, oh, okay. So then it becomes, okay, well, what action can I take? Because now I truly understand the why. I allowed the frustration and the anger to pass and let me sit in it for a minute to have that answer to the question, why am I feeling this way? And then it's like, what action do I have to take? Is it a conversation? Is it a change in my own behavior? Because during those couple of moments of sitting, I'm actually able to even maybe see it a little better from the other person's perspective.
Yes, I love all of that. I mean, you kind of took all the words out of my mouth. Absolutely.
So this has been the past couple of months for me, is trying to be self-aware about the emotional waves and why I'm feeling the way that I feel in any particular moments.
Yeah, and this is what I'm excited about, people hearing you talk about that process, because then maybe they can have more compassion for themselves, and that, you're not a child of 5 or 12 figuring this out. You're a man who's had decades of life experience, and you're recognizing there's still more room to grow. I'm just figuring this out now. So many people don't know how to identify what they're feeling and move through it and be compassionate with themselves so that they can move through it in a way that feels safe and that they feel the sense of their own support. Yeah. Right. And that with frustration and anger, not always, but it can often be a secondary emotion.
Exactly. It'll mask the real thing that's going on. Bingo. You got it.
Which is why
you have to sit in it for a moment.
Yes. And get curious, right?
Yeah.
And so where patriarchal masculinity like really boxes men in is that there are all kinds of very destructive messages around expressing, with themselves and with other people, feelings of hopelessness, of fear, of grief, of shame, of embarrassment, right? They're told, no, men don't, that's disempowering, right? And so they're stuck. They don't know how to identify it with themselves. It makes them feel like less than, and they don't know how to talk to their partners about it. And so they flip into frustration and anger. So a very, very common pattern is that they then take it out on the people that they're around, right? Yeah. And again, with that, with the societal kind of power differential between men and women, or with an adult and a child, there's an implicit threat in there. Right?
Of course there
like
is.
Anyone who's had a dad who's like gotten angry, like when you're driving, so many people have these stories of being in the car and dad gets angry and everyone holds their breath.
Yeah. Right?
Because he doesn't know what was going on first before the anger came in. He felt a sense of inadequacy because he got lost, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or something else happened earlier that day. And he doesn't know how to identify what he's feeling and to have compassion for himself about the suffering of those feelings and to move through it.
That's so important too. And I find it actually, rather than being disempowering, I find it very empowering, because if you allow yourself, because if I close my eyes and I think of just almost like floating in a raft down a river, riding that emotional wave that's there, and then allowing whatever the frustration and the anger to pass in order to find the answer of why. It's only then when I realized the truth of what I was feeling and why I was feeling it, to where I can determine what the best action is. And taking action is extremely empowering for a male specifically. But you can't get to that centered, wholehearted truth of yourself action unless you allow yourself to move past and through the frustration and anger into the true why of how you're feeling in the moments.
Yeah, absolutely. And the process that you're talking about is this integration then with self-knowledge and action, right? And you also mentioned being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes better and look at it from their perspective. So in frustration and anger, people get very locked in this, myopic perspective. And also in that then comes blame.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're angry, you're looking for who to blame.
Yep.
Right. And so you're creating further distance from yourself and further distance from the people that you're with. And that is not just in terms of personal transformation, but in terms of relational transformation. That is key, is people being able, both men and women, to identify, here's what I'm feeling. Like, women are encouraged to be more in touch with their emotional experience and landscape. However, because they're conditioned to to think that their worth is about caring for others, they still have a lot of challenges with managing their emotions, with caring for themselves.
For sure.
With their emotions, right?
This is a two-way street. This is both. We've been talking a lot about men and how they process emotions, but it's the same on the female side too. Especially, I could see in a not so great relationship to where the female has taken on more of a masculine role because of lack of whatever the partner is or is not doing any of that, and around the blame side of it too. Because for women, men, whatever, when you're in this mode, the opposite of blame is ownership. Right? Yeah. So the only way to even come to that point to where you can own your choices, own your emotions, own your actions after the fact, and own what you're bringing to the table or not bringing to the table is to to allow yourself to ride through that, like we've been talking, and to settle back into the positive masculinity and the positive femininity that can coexist very healthy in a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many layers to that, is like
there's
what you're describing.
God,
Right. Is understanding the reinforcing feedback loops that happen in relationships, that when we go into a place of anger and blame, and like you said, not taking accountability for our part in it, it's very linear thinking. and it's relational thinking helps better in terms of the, a deeper understanding of what's going on in the dynamic, and taking responsibility for, here's maybe what I was doing or wasn't doing. And like you said, it's empowering to understand ourselves in that way, because then we have choice. I can do it differently the next time.
Bingo. You got it. What's a way, when you coach people, what's a way to do like a pattern interrupt on that feedback loop? Because if you're feeding off of each other in anger in the moment, how do you break that so that you both can come back to that point of understanding why you're there to begin with?
So many things. One, I think the pause, right? To understand that once that kind of, Daniel Goleman describes it as emotional flooding. Once that starts, now we use the language of being triggered, right? Yep. Once your nervous system has been activated, your prefrontal cortex is offline. You are not thinking logically. It's a
freaking adrenal response at that point.
Yeah, and it's usually because of, small t or large T trauma from childhood. Right. Yeah. So part of it is understanding our relational patterns, right? Of what triggers us, what our wounds are, how, start healing yourself. And we also heal in relationships. It's both and. And so understanding, for example, a lot of the people that I coach have a trigger, an emotional wound around feeling invisible. Or that they didn't matter, or that their needs weren't recognized, prioritized. And anytime they sense that unconsciously in an exchange with their partner, their nervous system is activated.
Wow.
Right? So it's also awareness around your patterns. Do you go into fight mode? Do you go into shutdown mode? Right? And then how do you take care of yourself to get yourself back to a place where you can engage with your partner and actually hear what they're saying and share what's going on for you?
Yeah.
So pause. Once it's off the rails, pause. Don't continue the conversation.
Oh, right on. I wish there was like a white flag or something that somebody could. Not saying that anybody's surrendering in the moment or anything of that. It's like we need a pattern interrupt here.
Absolutely, and exactly like what you were saying in terms of the conversations that are so beneficial for people to have if they're considering marriage. It's really beneficial to have a conversation with your partner around, here's what I notice is triggering for me, and your partner can weigh in a compassionate way, not in a critical way. I also notice you get upset when this or that happens, to help you know yourself better, that type of exchange, and to talk about, listen, can we have an agreement that one or the other of us or both calls that kind of pause moment where we can kind of go off and take 20 minutes. It takes 20 minutes apparently to soothe our nervous system. Wow. And in that process of walking away to soothe your nervous system, you have to be careful about how you're communicating with yourself, because if you're being really self-critical, you're triggering your threat response again.
Yeah, you keep yourself in the loop at that point.
Absolutely, with the same thoughts over and over and over again about the injustice or, whatever.
Take a walk outside, take a drive, listen to your favorite feel-good music, something else that gives you some other different kind of stimuli other than your own head.
Yes.
During that 20 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Because once you're activated, you really can't hear what your partner's saying.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have an open mind at that point.
We are just like rapid. It's been like 35 minutes already and we haven't
Look what we've covered.
I know. Good God. This is incredible. With this, 38 minutes my team is telling me. That's phenomenal. This is great. We're just keep going here.
I have a question for you.
Yeah, shoot. Now that we took a pause, we took a 20-second pause right there. Yeah.
Yeah. So a question just immediately popped up for me as you were saying that, when you talked about this process that you've been practicing for yourself, right? And in terms of change, it's practice with like repetitive practice, right? And deep practice, and thinking about what went right for me, what was effective, what wasn't effective, what can I do differently. And so your understanding that's been really effective in terms of personal growth. I'm curious if it's a situation where you've had an exchange with somebody else and you recognized, frustration, anger, and then you took a moment to really kind of dive deeper and have a better understanding of maybe, was there another emotion I was feeling first? What's the process then for you that you've recognized is effective? You're like smiling already, so maybe you know where I'm going with this. In terms of then returning to the other person or sharing with the other person your experience or being curious about theirs, or what does that look like for you?
Yeah, it'll happen with an exchange with a person, or it will happen even on my own. So when you were talking about, continuously feeding yourself in those moments, but I've noticed too that, and I'm not an angry person at all. I mean, even parenting my kids, I was the one that would not raise my voice. I would go in the room, get down on my knees at their eye level, even when they were 3 years old, and just talk to them and just walk through this stuff, because that's my dad was the very same way, and so it's difficult to shove me over the edge. But when I notice that I'm over the edge, I'm able to notice it faster now after doing this integration work that I've discovered. And when it's in an exchange with somebody, I will need to say, as soon as I recognize it's like, hold on, time out, I'm sorry. I'm creating the pause, saying, I need a moment, please. I don't focus in the moment. I don't focus anything on the other individual, telling them that they're angry too, or whatever that is. It's just, as soon as it's like, we need a pause. Even just saying, I need a pause for a moment. Give me 20 minutes, whatever it is, please. And then allowing myself to feel this. However, at the same time, if I notice this by myself and I start thinking about a scenario with an individual, and it's usually before, it's interesting because your head does this, to yourself, it's almost like torture, I think.
Yes.
But before you go into a conversation with somebody, if you're going to call them, see them in person, I notice sometimes these come up.
Yes.
Before I'm even frustrated and angry, my brain will go into some kind of negative feedback loop. And then that's a moment where I will delay conversation with that person, or seeing that person, say I'm running late, whatever, just for a few minutes, so I can allow myself that time to say, okay, what is it about this conversation that I haven't even had yet?
Wow.
That is causing me to feel this way. What am I expecting to happen on this? Do I have wrong expectations? Is it because of the way that I'm feeling already? Maybe something else that completely unrelated is causing me to go into this. But it takes that moment to delay that conversation that you haven't had yet, because I'm assuming this is human nature. You'll start to already plan in your head how that conversation is going to go and how it can go badly.
Yeah, absolutely. You're trying to predict potential threat.
Yeah, and this is this is the difference between what I feel relationships should be in a creation mode and saying, this is what I want to create in my relationship, versus saying, this is what I want to run away from, I want to stay away from. So
absolutely.
In those moments, it's like, if I'm going into the conversation with that, I'm already trying to plan what I want to stay away from in the conversation, which is not the way that I want to show up in any sort of relationship.
Yeah, I'm so impressed with the self-awareness that you just described. Really, I'm serious. I'm thinking, wow, if more people could actually identify, I'm feeling some kind of way as I'm thinking about contact with this person, what is that about? Does it have anything to do with the person and past exchanges with them and beliefs that I've started to create about this person and not about their behavior? Is it about past painful experiences that had nothing to do with this person? Is it about something else that happened earlier today?
Yeah, I mean, it could even be little T or big T trauma from when you're a kid, because now you're projecting the way that you were treated onto that person and thinking that's going to go the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you also describe this process of, recognizing kind of, approach versus avoidance motivation. And also, people are, as humans, because of our brain's negativity bias, we are so good at using our imagination to create worst case scenario.
Yep.
Right. And you hear, we all do this, and it takes, the practice of, I tell my clients all the time, okay, that's great. So now you've created worst case scenario, and it can be helpful because you can think about what would you do in that situation. And at the same time, equal time for best case scenario.
Bingo.
Use your imagination to create best case scenarios. So if you think about having a conversation with this person, an example you gave, it's, what would meaningful connection with this person feel like? How can I play a part in creating that?
I love that. That's amazing. Wow. I think that's where we should stop for today.
Okay.
That was great. Oh my goodness. We've covered so many things today, and I think we got really, really deep. We talked a lot on the last episode, and go look up the last episode too, because that was a lot of, I feel, surface level, and today was a deep dive. So if you want to know where Jemma and I were coming from today, you've got to listen to the previous episode. So look that up. Jemma, you're awesome. Oh my gosh.
So are
I love our
you.
exchanges.
So are
Thank
you. I love your investment in personal growth, and you like role modeling that for people.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's the only way, I think, is to try to forge the path myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I agree.
JemmaRaneCoaching.com and on TikTok, because Jemma is a freaking viral TikTok star. Yeah, Jemma Rane Coaching on TikTok. Jemma, thank you.
Thank you so much. This is always just so fun and stimulating and gets my brain going. I love it.